All right, welcome to another episode of the High Performance Podcast. We got guests back on the menu, but also got new co-hosts introduced. Well, not really. Is this unexpected that Jacob would be here when we got guests back on? But co-hosting with Jacob today. Jacob, say hi to everyone.
What's up, everyone?
That's
glad to be a part of the process.
We're gonna work out this dynamic. I sound like I'm fucking introducing my kid to everyone. You're already a regular feature on the show. Anyway, let's cut to the chase here. Brandon, first performance on the High Performance Podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. I've listened to a few high performance podcasts in my day, and obviously, Angus, you and I have gone back and forth. You've been on the S&C roundtable, so it's great to be back when the podcast is, starting to have guests on it, and I'm excited to see where this all goes.
We're dragging it back out of the swamp, and actually, I'm curious to sort of run this by you. What are your thoughts on this? And did you take it personally when I talked about High Performance Podcast being the #1 fitness podcast in Australia? I'm curious to get your thoughts on it in general. Like, who are the big dogs of the scene? Because I felt like, what is the biggest fitness podcast in Australia?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't know if there are any big S&C podcasts. I felt like it was kind of just up for the taking. That's why I started mine. It felt like there was nothing really, nothing that has a high amount of substance where coaches are actually, well, it depends. It depends. With you kind of have this niche where there are a lot of personal trainers as well. So you kind of have this personal training, and then with your mentorship, you kind of try and, at least from my perspective, you try and empower these coaches to start working on their own and create this business and on their own. So I feel like there's that kind of divide where strength and conditioning for high performance divides from just like creating a business and being a personal trainer. So it's like a personal trainer S&C podcast. And obviously those lines do blur quite a bit, and we kind of have a lot of carryover. Because
it's my ego and my sense of identity that wants to call it an S&C podcast, because it's like fitness kind of cringe. It's kind of for people who are like, what do you think about greens powders? Are they worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Versus like S&C is actually, just cutting the brass tacks. It's like, all right, what actually fucking works here? Performance oriented. But then I'm like, is that a cop out in of itself? Because in a smaller demographic like Australia, I guess, like, is it too easy for the taking to be the #1 S&C podcast? And we should be thinking more broadly, because when I'm talking about, I guess what I'm talking about is like legit fitness podcasts, but then that's a subjective cop out in its own way.
Well, those female ones, like the female wellness bodybuilder ones, I think they're forever going to have us. We're never going to get close. They're going to get like 20,000 listens an episode. Whereas we're ranking in 500.
She just came in and fucking wheel kicked me straight out of the top 10 for the Melbourne Strength Culture downloads.
Never had a chance. They just got they've got a grasp on the industry. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting, and that was what was so cool about doing mine and seeing how it grew quite rapidly because of that. And I took a bit of a break from doing them just because the way that I view the podcast was I can just pick it up and put it down whenever I want to.
Oh, it's a side chick to you. I don't want to hear this. We've got to stay, Jacob, just between me and you, if we don't keep our nose out ahead of Brandon's S&C show, that's a bad sign. Because we're fucking serious about this schedule. Yeah, so yours really is, you're focused on quality over quantity.
Yeah, I think we won't have a transactional guest. It won't be a transaction. It'll be this is an opportunity to build rapport. Do you know what I mean? You've done hundreds of podcasts. You've been
on checking the other day, 358 this is.
But also how many have you been a guest on? Like, you've been on how many people have asked you and you probably not even wanted to do them as well? So there's so many transactions that have happened, and I'm sure if you were to meet all those people in a room, you wouldn't even know their names or who they were. So
honestly, that was a big part of it. Got sick of being dragged on other people's podcasts just to rack up their downloads. Like, I did feel like I was being passed around like a bong to every S&C podcast. Some of them were fucking mad. Probably like 1 in every 5, I'm like, this conversation gave me energy, but then a lot of them do tend to, especially when they're just always sort of probing for like the hot takes. and stuff. And like, I realize that's a part of the brand that I've developed. It's like when you drag Angus onto your podcast, obviously that's something you expect, but it's like, it's got to be a little bit more than that. And you have to sort of find it effortlessly. Whereas like, it just is kind of lame when they're just teeing you up a bit too much.
Yeah, and that's why I've really enjoyed having a lot of the same kinds of people on, and it's not really. I don't see ours as being like ever being like this huge entity, but I don't know. I think it's quite interesting. I think if you're doing it for the right reasons, I don't really see. I think it can go quite far, and you've obviously got really good marketing with your Instagram. You can leverage that.
Well, see, in my experience, like per unit of audience, it's the podcast that's so much better for selling. And it's like, it's a big part of the e-commerce model that I talk about. I'm not sure how you view things. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it and your experience with this type of content creation. But the way I view e-commerce in fitness, it's an extension of the gym floor. It's like the same game. You're going up, you're trying to introduce yourself to as many people as possible to increase awareness. And then you're just trying to give value to build trust over time until they are looking for something to purchase. It's just that in the online space, there's increased skepticism because there's just even more charlatans out there. So building that trust, it's a little bit more hard. And you've got to obviously navigate around this algorithm to keep people engaged so that you can build trust and give value for long enough that then they eventually make a purchase. And I think part of the reason it takes so long to build that trust is one, trying to dance around that algorithm, but then the short form, lacking nuanced content that you're forced to make. Whereas the podcast, the same way that people say going live on Instagram is a really good way to build trust because, you know, if you're talking for 40 minutes straight and you're a sociopath, you're going to slip up and it's going to come out sort of thing. And I view podcasts as that even more so. It's like, if you're willing, like I think about people double tapping my stuff. And I think you can get so much dopamine from a good post on Instagram. You're like, oh, 1,500 likes. That's 15 people tell you, like, imagine 1,500 people in front of you just like applauding you. That feels pretty good. But then I think about how I consume people's Instagram content. I'll double tap posts. I'll scroll for like 3 seconds. And if you pull me up here, hey, Angus, what was that post about? Oh, I couldn't fucking tell you. Like, it was just this knee-jerk sort of reaction. Pupils didn't dilate. My expression didn't change. Whereas to listen to some cunt for a full hour, I'm like, oh, you've got to either really have it in for that person or think that they've got something valuable to contribute. So sorry for the esoteric ramble, but like, where do you see podcasts fitting in terms of your, excuse the cringe term, content strategy?
In my wheel?
Is it something that's deliberate? Like, do you think about the environment that you're creating in terms of total content distribution, or were you just like, oh, podcasting could be fun?
I think both, but I think it's mostly the fun side of thing for me, because I don't see myself as in e-commerce yet. So I'm not in e-commerce, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's just I haven't developed enough products in the ecosystem to actually be in e-commerce. So one of the things that really changed my mind was even just recently, I was talking with Dave Gray about this, and we had a really good conversation last week, and he was just saying like, he gave me some advice, and then he ended up messaging me and was kind of like almost saying not to do that. And it was, I don't need to post every day. I don't need to do certain things because I'm not an e-commerce brand. So we just need to understand my goals with the podcast are quite personal, and that is to just have really good conversations with people that I find really intelligent. But then I know people will get some value from them. Then there's the old like, okay, well then I'll slip the products in that I sell, and those things I think take a lot longer to build trust to actually want to purchase them. But it's a really good opportunity for people to get to know me. So I think that's the best way to do it. And I feel like you just go in and out of phases, like you said with your Instagram content, like making short form things. I'm really in love with like story and context, and providing a lot of context, and providing like, when someone asks me, oh, what should I do this exercise? Should I do this movement? Or, you know, say you're out somewhere or you're out with family, what do you do for work? And it's like I'd rather give you the 5-hour answer than
you dive into it. Yeah. Well.
No, as in, that's why I'm just like, oh, I own a gym. I'm a personal trainer. I'd rather just say that and just fucking don't talk to me, because you're not even worth discussing like the whole nuances of everything that's in the business. And like, I'd rather dive down a lot of those things all the time with training. So I much rather not even get into the weeds. I'd just rather share like the knowledge or wisdom, or that's not saying I have wisdom, but like I'd rather share those things.
As a young coach, I think, things like having a personal philosophy or thinking about things like wisdom can make you a bit insecure, but I think you've earned the right to sort of talk about those sorts of terms.
Yeah. And I think the podcast gives me an opportunity to provide some of those things where, say, I was talking about this with Will Rattel, and Will was saying how, he goes, I think my YouTube channel's fucked me up from doing podcasts, and it's just fucked me because he goes, I just speak in like sentences. They're just like, then it's not a conversation. It's, the exercise rationale is this. This is why we do it. And he just talks so quickly. It explains all of his knowledge on a movement in 30 seconds. And he's not really trying to expand the book on those things. Like for him, trying to think about doing a seminar would be extremely difficult, because he's just like, just do this. This is the punchline, like almost giving the punchline first on every joke.
And that's what I saw in his page just from the get-go, other than him just being a weapon when he was uploading his reels and stuff like that. It was just like sprint, punchline
fast, all the time.
Lift slow, get a pump. It was just like, I feel like this is like extraordinarily pragmatic.
Yeah, and the type of person he is, and obviously it's quite successful in that medium, but then when you transfer that line of thought into another context, it's not really, it's far more difficult. I love to expand the book, and I don't know, I think there's just some of these stories that there's certain coaches who have actually done shit. They have so many examples to provide, and that's what I want to get out of the podcast. Like I want to get my coach on. I want to hear about I want him to share with everyone some of the crazy, stupid workouts they've done, some of the stupid things they did at AIS. And I don't know, maybe it's it's a very romantic way of thinking about podcasting, but
no, that was
awesome.
My favorite guest for that in particular was Adam Nelson. You ever heard about that bloke? He was in the 2000 Olympics shot put. He ended up getting the silver medal, but then the Polish bloke who outthrew him on the day, he ended up failing his drug test. And then Adam Nelson has this story about, all the triumph of the Olympics, even before that, like meeting Charles Poliquin. So he was one of the OG athletes that reached out to Charles Poliquin and be like, heard you know some shit with strength and conditioning. Charles was like, if you're serious, fly out to train with me. And this is like an elite collegiate shot putter. And the first thing he did when they met Poliquin, they trained arms for 3 hours and it made him puke. And like, the fucking story. But it's almost like,
but those stories, it could have been a movie, and that's something that I think you're not really going to get across. Like, I haven't read it, but I've heard people talk lots about it. The David Goggins books, and how after every chapter he sits down. I think there's an episode where I think the last one, he has his mum in it, and they talk together, and it's so beautiful. And I think, I don't know. It's a very romantic way of thinking about content, but it's the only way that I'm actually going to continue to do it.
Because people are so cold and emotionless about it, or they're telling you to be less invested because, like, the algorithm's so up and down, you just got to detach from it. But I'm like, ride the emotional roller coaster. Sorry, and as well, like, I'm not just talking about it in terms of the eyeballs that you're getting, but as in let yourself get cute and emotional about the content that you're trying to make. Like at the end of the day, if you don't have the courage to engage with it in that way, there's the downside, like getting hurt when you can't portray it the way that you want to. But then those moments where the content does connect in the precise way that you're meaning it to as well, because I think a lot of the time when you're making content, like the meaning that you're trying to portray, it's not 100% reliable that that's the message that's going to be received. Like, have you had that experience yet as a content creator where you're trying to send a certain message, someone really jives with your content, but then the feedback you get from them, you're like, no, this is not fucking it at all. Like, I know for me personally, when I was talking about biomechanics a lot, I got a lot of fragilistas interacting with my content. And then I almost had to deliberately change my messaging, take the focus off human movement for a while to wash those people out, talk about a lot of anti-fragile, let's simplify things, be a little bit reductionist. So now that I can swing back into talking about the nuances of human movement without worrying about some fragilista stumbling across my content.
What was the context? What were they upset about?
I was just sort of talking about wides and narrows and those sorts of archetypes. And I think that stuff's really useful for...
I love athlete archetypes and I love that kind of information.
Right. But then I think there's some people, because obviously these are stereotypes when we talk about these archetypes, and you talk about the typical stereotypes of a wide ISA, especially their propulsive strategies that they might lean into. But then they'll see someone and they'll be like, oh, this person wasn't behaving exactly like a wide ISA. How do I reconcile that in my model? I'm like, well, because I thought it goes without saying that people are more complex than their infrasternal angle. It's just like one thing that you can gain a lot of assumptions from. But again, it is just a set of assumptions to go out and test and explore. And at the end of the day, these things, we're just trying to express either end of this continuum. That was one of the major things for me.
You would think like brain tissue is like intelligent enough to not think in like pathways and models, and it's just isn't it just like a conceptual way of breaking things down to make it easier to explain and get your point across?
Yeah,
it's quite weird how certain people behave and get emotional about certain topics. To be honest, I haven't really had that, and my page is not as big as yours, but it could also be the fact that like I'm 6'3" and obviously you're not, so there's obviously those differences in the way in which people,
the size of the audience, I think, is a big thing, because that's something that I thought about as well. I was like, as my page grows to the size I want it to, I'm going to have to change my style of communication, because I thought I did have a crazy smart following in that first sort of 5,000 to 7,000. But then I've spoken to Jacob about it. I was like, at the end of the day, if you grow a page to 100,000 followers, you're going to catch a few idiots.
A lot of idiots. Yeah, I've spoken about this with many people and being like, should I go private after a certain amount? And I feel like at that point there, well, that's where you just continue to push the evergreen content, which is we've spoken a little bit about personally about, creating member site. Those people are only going to go there. And then obviously the guests that you attract onto the podcast, the podcasts, if they're done really well, like the one that you just mentioned about the Australian shot putter, people are going to go back and re-listen to that episode. That's evergreen. So I think if you're constantly pouring effort into that, it honestly, the Instagram is it gets way more credit than it deserves, and more respect than it deserves, in terms of like, it's not necessarily its power to sell, but more so it's how highly we value that number at the top. Like, it doesn't really, so what? I don't know. I'd rather have people listen to the podcast and messaging me about it. And Isn't that I get way more G-ups when someone says that was a great episode.
Capturing someone's attention to get a double tap for like 3 to 5 seconds. Well, let's not speak in hyperbole. I'm trying to think, like, what's the most...
I double tap things I don't like.
I'm always just supporting my mates.
But you do that.
Mates, first and foremost, you could post the most backwards bullshit. I give it a double tap. You could go full PRI guy and be like, I'm off barbells. I'd be like, yeah, I'll double tap it.
I am off barbells anyway. for kids especially. It's like I'm literally becoming that guy. I'm like that guy where I'm like, if you're under 16, just don't touch weights.
It was the overcorrection. I think, especially as CrossFit was emerging, you had a lot of parents who were just like, they thought about what the weight room did for their athleticism. And they're like, if I get my kid into the weights, now that we know that it won't stunt their growth, they're like, I'm just going to make this fucking super athlete. But man, puberty is just this motherfucker. Like,
just documenting that.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. Anything you do before puberty, the slate just gets wiped clean. until I haven't seen one freak kid who's just been S&C to shit just continue to dominate their peers post puberty.
I don't really have too much to add to that, Angus, to be honest.
So what I actually want to circle back to, because I feel like a lot of these perspectives that we're getting from you, like, they're lacking the context of who you are and what you do. And I know you're very much in my bubble, and especially on socials. Like, I know pretty much everyone who's interacted with my stuff is at least aware of you, and a lot of them are interacting with your content. But then the High Performance Podcast, it's a bit of an adjacent audience as well. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background before we then leap into more of these topics? Because it is going to contextualize things a lot. So a little bit of your sporting background as you growing up, and then early intro to the fitness career, and then just what you're trying to do now.
Yeah, growing up, it's probably a good idea that we do this for this audience. No, growing up, I played field hockey, and that was like the first proper sport that I actually was somewhat good at. And
made fun of for playing field hockey.
No, not at all. Well, that's going to like a predominantly European school. You do a little bit because like you're the only dude that has your own hockey stick, and the rest of the team, it's like the kid who brings the guitar to school. Yeah, no one's friends with that kid. So
I can attest to it. I went to that school. Clarinet. Yeah,
Jacob and I went to the same high school. So
yeah. Everyone was sort of like not frowned upon, but like, oh, they're interesting people. The people that were.
Well, you don't want to stand out.
Well, that's the thing. If you're successful, I feel like just being successful or trying hard or just doing well at that school, it was not that the school was bad because there was a lot of high achievers, but I think it was one of those things where it's like, unless you play soccer or you do football or you do underage drinking, those are the things that are probably going to be the three main pillars of social acceptance. Whereas I did none of those things. So then it obviously, but anyway,
so you're not cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all good. And played field hockey, really enjoyed that. And that was around the time where I started doing some CrossFit. And my dad actually, like the catalyst for that was my dad brought one of those things those doorway pull-up bars.
I thought you were going to say the door gym.
No, not the door gym. That was my old man's training
Randy
program
Couture.
growing up.
Yeah.
No, so no door gyms. But yeah, so doing pull-ups, and I couldn't do a pull-up, so I was so weak. And then around that time,
you were a big kid, weren't you?
Yeah, I probably was the same height as I am now. So yeah, I was just like long arms, no muscle. And then in one
moment
year,
arms.
pretty much such a long moment arm. Yeah, that lat had no hope in hell. And so that was awesome. And around that time I started Little Athletics, and I was about 14, I think. And I was pretty bad at a lot of the like more explosive stuff. Anything that required a lot of power, I was pretty average at. And that was probably the thing that motivated me most to go down more of like lifting and just wanting to correct a lot of those things, that the qualities that I really lacked, just being explosive. And that was like one of the main motivations. But then I also just really fell in love with CrossFit and really enjoyed that. And that was, I just remember being so excited to quit McDonald's and then start working at a CrossFit gym. So that was like, I just jumped straight into coaching. So as soon as I turned 8,
straight out of high school. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes. So I was 17, and as soon as I turned 18, so I was training at that CrossFit gym from 16 to 17. And, one of the days I was training with coaches, and the head coach just asked me if I wanted a job. And it was like the best thing ever. I was like,
that's amazing.
McDonald's.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so good. And such an awesome CrossFit gym to start out at, where it was predominantly like a weightlifting bias one. And that was where I met my coach that I have today. And like, there was a lot of people who clean and jerked 140, 150 at the gym. And like in 2013, 2014.
That's huge.
There's some strong people there. So that was awesome. So I get to grow up around that and got to be exposed to that all the time. So that was kind of like, you do muscle ups, you run, you lift. That's just how you train. So that was like my first exposure to like what proper training is. And there was obviously like, when you start doing well, you get exposed to like the competition side of things. So we did a lot of the Schwartz's CrossFit programs, which were kind of like the Star Strength of today. I don't know if you're familiar with Star Strength, but
Schwarzer. I was instantly thinking of Mark Schwarzer, the Aussie goalkeeper.
Okay, different.
And I know
very different.
I know Star Strength. Did you say Star Strength or Delay? Sorry.
Star Strength. But there's lots of kind of like Invictus, those kind of big names from back then. So those people kind of controlled that space. And
the
they were
Aussie
like
OGs of CrossFit program.
Yeah. I think CrossFit Schwartz was the first one ever in Australia. But you've got to think like how many people were doing online programming, were doing remote coaching to the same level and as well as like in a group setting and to have such a high caliber of athletes in multiple sports. They were pretty ahead of their time, and they'd been doing it for quite a while before I got there. So that was awesome. So I got to learn a lot of skills, probably like the best exposure to for anything, if you think of like getting started as a personal trainer. And then after then, it was kind of like, oh, okay, I'm going to focus more on weightlifting. So then you kind of bring in some of these old school principles, which didn't really help me as much. They ended up getting me a little bit injured and whatnot. But
Soviets worked out everything.
Such is life. I was missing the secret ingredient the whole time. So I had an awesome weightlifting coach growing up. So from like 18 to 24, nearly 25, I kind of mostly focused on weightlifting and competed in weightlifting. And yeah, kind of just, I felt like when I reflect on it now, just like constantly riddled with some kind of tendonitis or injury or whatnot, and progressed quite quickly, but then really struggled to progress. And that was around the same time as when I decided to open a gym. So my family and I, my dad and I, we brought a factory together. So we decided to secure a premises. We had the opportunity to buy something and it was close to home. And so we decided that would be an awesome way to work together. That would be Dad's retirement as well. So that would be what he would do. He always says like, you remember your last days. He's very like philosophical in that way, where he's like, I really want to be doing something I enjoy when I finish working.
That's actually mad.
When I'm done.
Because my old man's retiring now. He worked as a salesman for majority of his working life, and I think he has hobbies and he's really grateful for that. Like he has his surfing and stuff, but even as a 70-year-old, like it's amazing that he's out there surfing and stuff, but still trains 2 times a day. But work was such a big part of his identity. But I can see how for your old man, it'd be so easy to scale his way out of the business, but never fully, but still really meaningful, like helping people. Is he active in the coaching, or is he more sort of helping
every night?
Yeah, so he's out there coaching like that. Yeah, sick.
Every night with me. Yeah. So sometimes I'll just sit upstairs and do some programs and he'll be downstairs helping everyone with their lifts and whatnot. And
is he woke?
Very woke.
With the coaching?
There's some elements where I'm like, you're a bit old school on certain things, and he has his rationales for certain things.
He's hitting them with SRA curves and shit?
No, he's more like pin your scaps back sometimes and stuff like that.
Hey,
but
sometimes.
No, they really, it's awesome. It's a great dynamic. Sometimes the clients will come over and say, Mario said to do this and you're saying to do that. I'm like, and then Dad will be like, whatever Brandon says to do, that's what you do. You just override. He overrides me all the time. So It's like, so he has so much respect for me, and so do I. So no, it's an awesome dynamic. And yeah, so that's kind of what he wanted to be what he wanted his final phase of his working life to be. And we're really lucky that we get to do that together. So we've got this barbell club that's kind of evolved over time. We started out as a CrossFit gym. We had sorry if I'm rambling.
No, this is good. I hate it when you ask someone to explain themselves and they just give you like a few fucking paragraphs. And it's like, I know you've fucking been up to more than this, because I will probe further from all this. Yeah,
that's all right. So yeah, we started out as a CrossFit affiliate, and I didn't really, my views on all of those things completely split from what I believed in. And probably personally, I don't believe in supporting any other entity or brand besides myself. So if I want to grow something, it's going to be my own. That was probably one of the bigger things. And that was probably something that I just learned a lot about business. And since
were you ever a full-blown frother though? Like, I know you said you liked training CrossFit and then you went over to
I don't think I was as hardcore. Drinker? I don't think I was. No, not when I reflect on it. I was like, there's some people I hear talking about CrossFit, like some clients that I've met and stuff like that. And I'm just
like, oh fuck, Greg Glassman is so smart and like figured it out. I'm like,
yeah, I couldn't, or even just like how it's a great lifestyle and stuff like that. I was never really brought into any of those things. It's just training. It's not that deep. So sometimes I get very reductionist, but yeah, that was awesome to kind of move on from that chapter. And that was when I think things really started for me, kind of growing my own personal brand and like thinking about what I want to value think about it as a 20-year-old. What the fuck do you know about like having a premises, running your own gym and doing all these things? You're pretty dumb. So you have no skills at all. And I felt very ill-equipped, and yeah, quite quickly my ego got crushed, and there were lots of scenarios where I was like, the gym was not performing, things were not doing well, we didn't have enough members, we weren't making enough money. And so my brain just had to turn on to like, okay, sink or swim. We have to really try and succeed. And since then, it's been a constant struggle to get to where we are now, and it's been great.
Here you are. You're over 5. How long have you had the gym open now?
So now, yeah, we're still going. We're still in business, and we've been going for 7 years.
So over that 5-year milestone, which I know is just sort of arbitrary, but what's that statistic? It's like 95% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years.
I have heard that statistic, and I would say once we got through the 5 years, like the income like doubled. It was just something that happened.
Exponential.
Yeah. And so, it's going to be great to see. Like, obviously, a lot of the things that the gym's grown has been mostly through online, I mean, if it's growing, it's growing.
That. Yeah, like, but what gets you more excited? Like, what's the big marker of success for your business?
Yeah, it's not online. Online is, for me, is a means to an end. In terms of online is a great way for me you know what I love about online, and I'm so grateful for it, because it means people who actually appreciate me can find me. Whereas in the real world, there's not many people who really need nor want the skill set that I have for the particular like day-to-day shit that they want to lose weight or they want to get stronger. And we don't really want those kinds of people anyway.
Got a beach holiday coming up in 6 weeks. Help me out.
Yeah, so those are the people that
all right, have some deep tier players maybe.
Yeah, I'm just like, have you thought about like the global stimulus of Olympic lifting? So it's great. And we're really lucky to have some like really strong and really athletically gifted clients, both within our gym and obviously online. But I don't know, I feel like I don't know where it's going to go. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, what's your view of the facility that you're in? Because it's like a decent size, but is there any aspirations to have a huge mega facility, or is your line of thinking that then that means bringing too many other coaches into the mix to sort of facilitate and service that? Or is that something that you sort of want to take on as a challenge? Like, how many coaches can I integrate into my system and my model? What's your view of employing people? Because like I said, like you work with your father, but then taking it outside of the family, is that something you would ever do?
Yeah, it's so hard for me to do that. I don't know. You've obviously, we've kind of worked together in a very brief moment, and you kind of see kind of some of the personality traits that I have and how I operate. It's not really conducive to maybe not necessarily being a team player as such. It's mostly I'll just do everything and then it's done. So that's probably a skill set that I need to develop. So right now, my current skill set wouldn't allow me to hire anyone. I don't think that I don't have the management skills or the confidence to pass on other tasks to other people. But it's not necessarily like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the things that I do are very deliberate. So and very personal. So we're not really at a stage where we have less personal things that wouldn't really matter. Like everyone at our gym is realistically coming for me and staying for me in a as not to make it egotistical, but like that's a big draw card. They really like the fact that
they're not coming because it's like got all the prime equipment. They're not coming because it's 24 hours. Like
no, because we are short on a lot of those other features. Like we don't have the greatest times. We don't have, there's a lot of things that are obviously a negative for us. But as far as changing premises, it's quite difficult to find like in Melbourne. Because obviously we'd want to buy because we're European. So it would be difficult.
Oh, so that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
Because I heard you talking about this with, I think it was Steve. Maybe it might have just been Steve's appearance on David Gray.
Yes, it probably was. Yeah, well, I think my uncle has like 40 or 50 properties and like they're just like tycoons. So it's kind of like in our DNA to just want to do that and just like
acquire land.
Acquire land. I don't know why.
Fucking second Holy Roman Empire.
Pretty much. So the Accardi dynasty, but it'll be quite difficult for us to find something of similar value in another area that's larger. So unless we move further out, and when you move further out, the talent pool probably drops a little bit. Yeah,
because you want to be near the good athletes as well. You don't want to have them to make their fucking mum or dad drive for an hour just to drop their kid off at the S&C facility. Because in the fullness of time, if everything went exactly to plan, I would open up a facility, but I know I'm more than 5 years away from it, sort of 5 years, sort of in my head. But it's probably realistically at least 10 years away. And there's literally one property that I know will be absolutely fucking perfect for it. It's an old bowling club that went under. So it's got indoors, it's got these big windows and everything like that. So it'd be great. People could see what's happening from the street. But then all the bowling greens out the front, that's for all your field work and stuff like that. There's like 3 or 4 of them scattered around the gym. Someone was running an F45 out of there. It's already gone under. I need probably another 2 more gyms to go through there and go under before I on that. But if that property is not available, like I'm fucked when I want to open up a gym. And I just won't, because I wouldn't do it, like I said, unless there was the perfect sort of facility. I'm kind of curious because I thought training weightlifting specifically was a bigger part of your story and a bigger part of not only your identity, but then also the gym's identity. Or did I sort of miss it? Was there a phase of your life where you were just like, I want to be the fucking, represent Australia being a weightlifter? Or was that just me as an outsider looking in, getting the wrong idea?
No, probably. Yeah.
This is sort of around the time you started hanging out and training with Zach.
Before then. Yeah, well before then. About the time that I had the gym, probably just before COVID. I think a lot of those aspirations and dreams got crushed. And I was like, this is probably not going to happen because I do not have the time nor energy to commit to this, because I can't recover whilst trying to manage growing the gym. I just don't think me personally, I didn't have the talent to do so.
Yeah, that was the same for me when business was going crap, training was going really well. And then as soon as I actually had people to train, my training just went to absolute shit. And it was the most humbling thing because I was really judgmental of, for lack of a better word, more senior trainers who weren't taking care of their own training and progressing. But yeah, as soon as you actually have a solid roster on your books, and because I think for me as well, I had a bit of an identity as a lifter, but more what I was looking for was proof that my model actually worked. Whereas as soon as I had better talent than myself to work with, I didn't give a fuck about my own lifting. I've sort of come back around to it in the long run just for a different sort of satisfaction. But it was crazy how much just as soon as I had some decent talent on my books, I was just like, fuck all my training and stuff. Just
yeah, it's funny what we find, like, I know what inspires us or what gives us satisfaction or what gives us confidence. It's, yeah, when you work with a whole host of people and a variety of, I don't know, I guess people in different contexts, there's definitely some clients I have that I'm like, I could feed you anything and it will just be great. And it's more so as long as they love it, I think it works fine. And I think now with both of us, I don't think there's many glaring deficits in the way in which, like, that we train certain qualities. I think it's all being trained fine. So I don't see why. Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's up to the athlete and the environment they're in.
What are your thoughts, sort of reflecting back to when you were most serious about weightlifting to now, with how you coach the lifts and even how you approach your own Olympic lifts? What are your thoughts in terms of? I think I'd like to split this question up into 2 different parts. First, in terms of like the movement aspect of it and how you view the technical model for the snatch and the clean and jerk. And then after that, I'd sort of like to talk about your approach to the training for a weightlifter in general. Maybe that's a shit segue, but I think it's a good topic.
Good. Yeah, it's great. So with the technical models, I guess the technical side of things, the CrossFit environment was in some ways very progressive and super woke. And that was like my first introduction into learning the movements. So there was things like...
So perhaps a less dogmatic introduction to weightlifting than what most people who jump straight into weightlifting get.
It was like I had the craziest arm bend in a snatch and clean. Like my arms were like legitimately at 90 degrees. And
I jumping and shrugging and
I used to pull the weight off the ground with like bent arms. I just had bent arms off the floor.
CJ Cummings.
Literally like that. And my coach was like, at the time, he was like, it's fine. You're tall. Like, so be it. And he was like, just let it be. He's like, you clean 140. It's fine. Like, doesn't really matter. And there was a lot of those kind of things but then there was also like pin your scaps back. That was built into that. So like just creating tension everywhere. And then just like a poor understanding of how to brace. So like, push your belly out, push your belly out, breathe through your abs, that kind of shit. And then there was, the fear of rounding the spine. But then it kind of like those things, I don't know, I felt like it was very inconsistent with the way that those things were approached. Like there was the way that you taught an athlete. So like one of the things that I have baked into my mind is I just remember one, like the head coach at the time coming up to me and saying to me, you say the word don't so many times. Don't talk to people like that. And then like, you know how you have like these certain profound moments on the ways in which you teach people. And so now I just like in my head, I just will forever have that experience. And like, it wasn't a particularly meaningful time or anything that he said, but it was like, there's certain ways in which that I was being told to look at.
It wasn't like a
movement.
dramatic movie moment.
No, but there was definitely things that gym taught me. And because it was a pumping CrossFit gym, there were so many people coming through it and so many new people, but also so many strong people. And you were just seeing like, okay, that's a pretty good movement strategy. He rounded his back a fucking shitload, but he lifted really well. Or some people pull back a lot more. Some people aren't as effective at this movement. It's probably because I think it was a lot of just common sense connecting the dots. And a lot of people really struggled with that. Like, for example, if you're fairly weak at squatting, you're probably going to be pretty bad at clean and jerks, just in general. Like you're just bad at creating compression, or you're just bad at doing these things. And now I think that we have so many other words or so many other, no, they're all made up anyway, made up movement models that can explain the same kinds of things.
But I like that. Something I think that we agree on a lot is that movement models can be simultaneously incorrect, but all like very useful. I think people get way too horny on that George Box quote. It's like, oh, all systems wrong. It's like, well, you got a fucking system, don't you? Or you're just making up random shit for every individual that blows through your doors.
Yeah, I think when people sit down and they write out exactly the things that they want to see in a movement, it's all the same stuff. So I think then when we got more in towards weightlifting and tried to extract more performance out of myself, and I spent more time with my coach, things became more dogmatic. And that's where things in some ways diverged. And then in some ways my understanding improved, because there were just like some old school traditional things like pulling back is bad. And it might've been a bad strategy for me, but then it was just, I feel like a lot of the things was just my interpretation of like, okay, I don't really have a lot of knowledge in this area. I'm just going to take this cue that I've been parroted a lot, and that's been told to me a lot, and I'm just going to spread that to everyone. So I think it was just a matter of like, lately I'm just giving all the old school legends the benefit of the doubt and just putting it down to the fact that it's my misunderstanding of the context and the way in which that it was told to me, and they were specifically telling me to do something, not that everyone should do this. So
that was a representation of their model at its core. Yeah.
Well, yeah, possibly, but I think I'm just going to put it down to the fact that like I was 20 years old and I was really inexperienced, and I'm learning a lot of these things as I'm going, and I haven't had enough time to really, enrich myself in all of these experiences and see all these things to actually know what I'm talking about. So now I'm at that stage where I feel very comfortable in talking about a lot of these technical things, and now I'm just looking for the similarities in movement. And there's some things that are definitely bad strategies, but
yeah, I was talking about this with Jack Edwards on the show yesterday, just sort of how I've just sort of gone back to appealing to people's authority. It's like at the end of the day, if you've
good anecdote,
the most big, strong lifters, I don't see how we can get around that. Like, and I do believe that there can be people lacking results who are more correct in their theory. But then there is always that thing of like, why aren't you doing the thing? And then also like, especially because I'm so off this optimal thing and I'm always looking for good enough and always like trying to strain information through that like anti-fragile sort of thinking sort of lens. And even with those coaches where our systems almost seem diametrically opposed at a surface level, I have to acknowledge that all those things that they were doing, they obviously were good enough, and they didn't introduce so many threats to the system based on obviously all the athletes and the coaches' individual context as well, that it prevented them from getting results. Like even Squat U, like disagree with so much of his core training philosophy. His technique looks ugly as shit to me, but then I also have to acknowledge this man snatches 110, clean and jerks 150 at about 85 kilos body weight. I'm like, some of the shit there is like obviously good enough, as much as it pains me to say.
Yeah, I think in order to clean and jerk 150, there's a lot of things you have to do quite well. There's like, and at 80 kilos, like there's going to be a lot of similarities, and they might have an understanding that they might think that, it's because I pin my scaps back, that's why you do it. It's like, no, it's actually because you're quite strong and your ability to hold this posture or this position is actually why it's doing it. Or yeah, it's just the poorer. I think with what I'm trying to do, and I'll speak for myself, and you can add to this, Angus, but it's like we're just trying to have a better rationale or a better explanation for why we're seeing something. And that's why some of these human movement principles we're so attracted to, because we're trying to just search for these better answers.
It's, in my view, I want everyone from their own perspective to have this optimized model, but I also think you need to be able to coherently explain how everyone else got their results. It's like, well, if you're saying that these things are so bad, I need you to explain to me why old mate over there still got sick results despite the fact he's saying some very opposing things. And then that's sort of what I go back to, is like developing the broadest toolbox. I think that that's something, just another tool in the toolbox has like copped a lot of criticism lately. But like, if you're going to try to meet people where they're at, I just don't really see a way around that. I'm just sort of talking about my own views now instead of asking questions. Let me go back into hosting mode. That was really insightful though. And thank you for the in-depth answer. I'm now sort of curious to hear your thoughts more on the organization of training and programming for weightlifters. Because as well, like something that I wasn't considering is that you came in with the CrossFit perspective. Did that give you the idea that maybe it was worth training more variously for weightlifting, or did it make you go ultra specific because you're like, no, I was doing CrossFit and now I'm doing weightlifting. Let me remove the filth.
It was there was a remove the filth kind of moment. Definitely. Yeah. I removed. Yeah, we went hardcore. Yeah, I think there was like so many times where my coach would be like, he would send me a text and we'd just finish a huge session on a Wednesday, let's just say like clean and jerks. And then he would just send me a text. He'd be like, go back to the gym when you're ready in the afternoon and just do this. And he would just say like PCL, so like power clean, plus it'll just say power clean PJ. So he would just write it like shorthand. He'll just write X 3 times 3 times at 120, and he'll just write the weight, and he'll say snatch, pull, light, and he'll just write, do more of them, and then and it would just be like
go
so
chop
many
some
times.
wood.
He'll just, and there would be like, that was probably the peak of the before I had the gym. Yeah, that was like the most, where he would send me those text messages to go and do more stuff. And then I think he kind of saw how like the gym was taking a lot out of me, and there was we still did some stupid stuff.
The bucket was overflowing.
Oh man, it was so bad. And
but at that age you were at, had you not been trying to run your own business, the bucket might have had enough space for that stupid train.
Oh, it definitely would have. Yeah. And so I remember like when we opened the gym, I was doing sets of 5 on like power clean, power jerk at 120. And then like, because we had 5s in the program, because that's just something you do on clean and jerks.
Capacity.
Yeah. After a comp. And then being like that same year in December, like not being able to clean and jerk 120 for a single, and just being so like mentally drained and burnt out. And it fucked me up so bad. And it still does. Like I still
mental roller coaster.
Yeah. And I still find like my training so variable because of the gym, but that's just, I just deal with things. I don't know. They told me.
Dudes more variable as well, just in their ability to accumulate so much fatigue. Like I feel like I can have a spectrum, myself.
Yeah.
And I can wash out fatigue in like 36 hours.
Yeah, that's not me.
But then also lose top end, like lose fitness in that space as well.
Yeah, it's wild. So yeah, that was something that was quite interesting. So before, like, string together, lots of muscle ups, 10 muscle ups, doing weighted muscle ups, doing handstand push-ups, doing all those kinds of skills, and then transitioning to like for 6 years I did 5 exercises, and it just kind of, maybe it was really good because I had that big base, and then I just went full SPP for so long. And like, I've got my coaches, I've got this logbook because we might put out some programs, or like some vintage weightlifting programs.
I thought it was just going to be a photo of him on your desk.
No. And it might just be like some old school programs that they ran at the Institute, and just like as an educational resource. But like there were things like there was brief periods where we did do some jumps and some stuff like that, but there were so few and far between where, yeah, I think there was also just an assumption from his background being like, I assume you're doing these things, where it probably was just like him needing to be a better coach, making sure that I was doing those things, and I just didn't know.
Yeah.
So
Making too many assumptions.
There was many assumptions. That's also another, that's a big problem. So yeah, doing that for a long time, and obviously I got quite strong quite quickly. And then, yeah, just needed just like a lot of weeks where I was like, my shoulder's fucked. Can we do just pulls only? So there were many of those weeks, pulls and squats. So yeah.
It got me excited when you mentioned just your program, just texting you the program sort of shorthand on the spot. Like that's one aspect of weightlifting coaching that I think was kind of futuristic, like that is sort of the OG weightlifting coach's reactive approach to training, sort of before Mike Teixeira and the powerlifters sort of adopted this John Kiley, Mladen Jovanovic inspired approach. I think intuitively a lot of weightlifting coaches, because it was so skill intensive, they almost trained weightlifting like a martial art. It's like, I don't know how many times you need to practice this kick. I don't know how many times you need to snatch to figure out this snatch. I'll just observe you and then react to what's happening in front of me.
There was so many. Oh man, there was so many of those. Like, and we had the best. Like, man, I was doing online coaching in 2012 or 2013 with this coach. Yeah, he was awesome, man. He had it all figured out. He would send me the program. We'd talk about it. He would text me after every workout. So I'd text him, call him after every workout. It was mad. And so there was one time where it was like the first day I clean and jerked 140, and I was like, Goran, my abs. He's like, oh, and like, you know, the way that they say things, they exaggerate things. It's like, oh, the abs have to do so much work to like hold the posture. And like, just the way he would explain things was like so romantic about like just talking about weightlifting, and him being like, okay, just cut it back tomorrow. Because his thing was always like, you know, It's like some days after a hard session, I'd have trouble snatching 50. So, you know, I think it was a lot more reactive than looking at the journals and looking at all the things. That wasn't
built into the training theory. It was sort of just something that they all seemed to understand, like to an extent, but couldn't express. They didn't have the terms to express it as part of their model.
Yeah, I think the current understanding of what was done prior, in my opinion, is like completely wrong.
John Kiley talks about this. He's like,
this is not at all what happened.
Rigid USSR systems, but he's like, if you were there in person, it probably would have been a lot more on the fly. It's just that to write it down in a book, it came across. We were like outsiders, just like staring through a glass window.
Well, they would walk in.
Books. Yeah,
they'd walk in at Institute, and then they'd get their program for the day on the day, and it would be written on the day. So like there were so many things where it was like, oh, you had your block, and it was all numbered. So like and then on the back of it had a glossary, and then the glossary, so it'd be like you do 14, so exercise 14, and you do 3 sets of 3 at this weight, and it's handwritten. And so 14, you look at the glossary, it's like 14's power clean and power jerk. Okay, do power clean and power jerk. No. And I have the old. See if I can find it.
Even just that process of digesting your program like that, like there's no knee-jerk reaction when you see it there. There's this exploratory process to even work out what your workout is for the day. It's just one other anecdote I want to share as well. Sorry, I shouldn't make the podcast about me, but Mike Teixeira was saying that because he got the reactive approach of Verkhoshansky, who was organizing training for throwers. And again, they were just doing like daily microcycles, like literally just taking things one day at a time. I'm curious, like, how did it get distilled in the books as these rigid fucking writing out training just fucking 3 months in advance?
What does Nassim Taleb say? History is written by losers. So it's
so they just got towed by the Bulgarians. Like, all right, let's just sell some books at least.
It's quite interesting. Like, I think from periodization in as a concept in general, as an old school concept, is like the coach really wants to have a good idea of where they want to take their athlete. And so the coach wants to know, like, okay, where are we working towards? And then not necessarily that that's set in stone. I can't imagine an old school weightlifting coach like these great coaches would be extremely philosophical, and they all wrote, and they all were quite progressive in some of their understandings of the human body or the way in which they coach their athletes. And I can't imagine that them not being like, if they said to me, give me an annual plan, they would definitely tell you the next day, like, this isn't set in stone. This is, you asked me for an annual plan. This is how I'm going to interpret
what we need to work. It's a government-run thing. Like, of course, like just logistically, if you're a government employee, the Russian government's like, oh, you don't know what you're doing tomorrow? That's fucking awesome. Like, they would be like, no, show me what you're going to be doing in 6 months. Like, Olympics is here. Like, what does the next few months? Yeah, it's fuck. Like, and also, so going back to like I'm sure like from a philosophical and just a experiential point of view, they knew that things had to be reactive, but then looking at the core of science at the time, what we thought a human was, what we thought stress was, you know, a lot more like thinking about the body as a machine or just this fragile vessel for the soul. Like, have they had today's up-to-date scientific understanding and worldview, they probably would be like, oh no, like we had a feeling that a bunch of this shit was going on, that we shouldn't try to predict things as rigidly. And even like looking at the society it emerged from, much more rigid society, feelings probably don't matter as much. Sorry, the time period and sociopolitically.
Well, they all had which Goran had it when I went to his house the other day, which was like the AIS psychology package, which was like the sports psychology package. And it's like a bound folder, and in it has everything you need to know. And it has like there's handwritten letters about a sports psychologist writing their observations on how impressed they were with the athletes and whatnot. They all got these tapes. And so part of the package was you got these tapes and you had to listen to these tapes, and the tapes said that there's no, like on an MP3 player. So you'd finish training, you'd go in your room and you'd listen to the tapes.
Manifestations.
And the tapes would say there's no such thing as physical fatigue. It's all psychological. And so there were a lot of those, that was like bred into them. That was like brainwashed into them, that there's no such thing as physical fatigue. It's all just a experience. And that's the route that they went on. And you imagine you've got these people, you're being employed to lift weights and be a beast, and you accept that being tired is okay. It's not really going to work. Like, unfortunately, this isn't a game. This is
old school.
But it won't work. If you say, like, I think about it with my athletes, like if I say to them, you know, the ones that are competing, if I say, oh, it's okay, you know, I'll be all right. For some of them, that the fucking does not work. That's like, if someone said that to me, if I'm training, like I've got friends that I train with and they're like, you look really tired today. That's the fucking last thing I want to hear. And they're there getting paid to lift weights, to break records, to you know, literally put money on the table for themselves, because otherwise there's people lining up to leave. Like there's people lining up to join the institute. So I think it's just it's a necessary part of what it's like to run an elite squad. And there's a lot of things that I think are like, in this one aspect of your life, needs to be this high level elite approach, but not necessarily to all aspects of your life. Like it's okay to be tired in any other aspect, but in your sport, in the thing that you're trying to be a world champion at, you are going to need to be better than everyone else at. So there's going to be some huge differences to society in that way. And I think that that's a perfectly reasonable thing to expect of someone to do something better than, you know, that's ever been done before. So
yeah. I feel like Keane would really like that sentiment. You got to reinvent the wheel if you're going to do something that's never been done before, to some extent, at least.
Yeah, I had a great conversation with John Nicolosi, who's a track and field coach for the short sprints in Melbourne, and he coaches quite a few Olympians.
Is this the seminar you went to?
Yeah.
What's his name again?
Can
you spell it?
John Nicolosi.
Sorry, yeah, John. That'll be actually a bit easier than the first time I heard it.
That's all right. I just wanted to like slip it in, but no, it's all good. And he and I had a really good conversation on day 2 when we were just talking about, you know, we were just touring his new facility and just talking a little bit about just like the personal stories of coaching some of these elite athletes and some of these Olympians, and just like how well does he actually know them, and him kind of just explaining just some examples of athletes who are actually like, I think he said one of the ladies that he coached, I think it was Hannah Bassick. I could be wrong. And I don't even know if I should be saying this, but anyway, she was one of the first people. I think she was one of the first people to break. It was like 11:2 or some kind of time. Jack would probably message me and be like, no, it was this time. I need to set the record straight. Anyway, thanks, Jack, for listening. But in the short sprints, she was one of the first women to kind of set a new standard. And then shortly after that, lots of women saw that it was achievable, and then more times started to fall. But he was talking about how just working with females and just working with some of these women and finding it quite challenging holding such a high standard all the time in training. and how mentally draining that is on the athlete, but then just also realizing that John, as a coach, really wants you to understand that I only want you to hold this standard for this one element in your life, not for all the things in your life. So imagine if you're a neurotic.
Usain Bolt.
Well, if you're neurotic in everything you do.
He was so good at switching on for the race, but as soon as he was out of the race, was just fucking off, seemed completely checked out. Or even like sometimes he would seem checked out until they're in the blocks. But then in the blocks, he's on. He's like off, and on. I think no athlete expresses that yin and yang.
Well, you see how much of a fun time they're having, like just outside of it, and then just flicking the switch. You see fighters do it lots, and I'm sure it's just a necessary part of being an elite performer, and you can kind of see that represented quite well. Even people personally, you crack a joke and then you're like, how the fuck are you lifting so intensely? Just like, we just cracked a joke and then now you're bending over.
Compensation from people who aren't as athletic. It's like, well, I'm just going to have this act of seriousness to try to pretend that I'm that guy.
Well, it could be a learned behavior.
You can deliver. No, you're right. Observing others.
Yeah, and I think it's just something worth noting that when we're talking about these things, and obviously we're talking about it on a medium where there is context, how we can't expect, like when I make bold statements or when I say these things, it's like we only want you to hold this high standard for this one thing. So yeah, you see it talked about with the number of things, but anyway.
Guys, we've been yakking your ear off for an hour. As much as I could yak to Brandon about weightlifting and training all day, we're actually going to meet up and react to some of his training clips later this week. So keep an eye out for a more abbreviated episode as we're reacting live to some training clips, maybe a few competition performances. Recently, there's been some huge weightlifting performances on the international stage. Brandon, thank you so much for giving up your time today. Just wondering if you'd tell people where they can find you if you want to be found, and then anything else exciting you got coming up. Very short.
Thanks.
Not 2-3 months from now. We'll worry about that later.
Yeah. No, thank you, Angus. It's been a pleasure. And always enjoy talking to you. I always think of some things that I've been manifesting in my mind, and no, it's great. And yeah, if people want to check me out, they can have a look on Instagram. I like to have a bit of a presence everywhere. So Instagram, YouTube, and obviously the podcast is S&C Roundtable.
Highly recommend checking out S&C Roundtable. I don't expect it to happen, but if High Performance Podcast ever drops the ball and doesn't upload one week, you all have permission to go over there and give Brandon a download, because it is absolutely high quality over there at the S&C Roundtable.
Thanks so much, guys.
All right, we'll catch you guys later. Thank you very much.